Okay, I think we're going to get started, everybody. I think we have all the tech issues worked out, and I appreciate everybody taking the time to come to and register our first summer webinar series workshop seminar with Sean McEwen, who's going to be talking about leading workplace inclusion. So thank you, everyone, for taking the time. The workshop, as Sean was just saying, is about 2 hours, a little bit longer. So I think we're going to have a break in halfway through around there anyway, just for a second for people to grab a drink or use the bathroom or stretch. Questions are going to be welcomed. So if you do have a question, just use the chat box if you'd like, and Ashley and I will keep an eye on the questions that are coming in and bring them forward to Sean. If you would like to ask a question verbally, just let us know and we'll unmute you. You can do that too. And there will also be opportunity for questions at the end if we have time. So if you want to wait till the end, that works too. So as I said, this is the first webinar of our MentorAbility Atlantic webinar series. My name's Marcus Jamieson. I'm the regional coordinator for MentorAbility Atlantic, and Ashley Hammond is from Newfoundland. She's on this call, on this webinar as well, and she is the regional coordinator for Newfoundland and PEI. So we're really pleased to bring Sean McEwen all the way from Alberta today to talk about leading workplace inclusion. Some of you probably already know Sean. He's been working in and overseeing employment inclusion services for over 20 years and also in nonprofit management. He's done a lot of work consulting with the government, Indigenous organization, employers, and service providers around training, policy, service, design, organizational change, and inclusion. And one of the things I really admire about Sean is his passion for collaboration. In fact, I think I heard him in the past say that when you collaborate, it releases a chemical in your brain that is the same chemical that gets released when you hug your mother. So today, when we're going through this webinar and we're all collaborating, it'll be like hugging your mom. So that's great. And every time I've heard Sean speak on various topics throughout the years, many times, and I have to say each time I learn something new and I come away feeling a little more enlightened in the work that we're doing. So I'm really happy to have him on board today. And without any further ado, I think we'll pass it over to you, Sean.
Thanks, Marcus. Thanks for the nice introduction. I appreciate it. Hi, everyone. Welcome to yet another Zoom call during COVID-19. I'm sorry this is how we're meeting today. I love to be doing these presentations in person. But this is just how we'll do it for now. And I'll try and make it as interesting as possible. If you need to stand up, move around, for the record, none of the panelists can see you. So if you need to move around, stretch, do that. And with that, I'll get into it. I think some of our objectives today are to really look at our work and to look at all of the things that we're learning in terms of workplace culture, all of the things that we're learning that can really serve employers. And I want us to look at what can we do with that information to, at the exact same time, better serve our clientele and better serve employers. So looking at working smarter, not harder. I know everyone in this field works very hard, and I'm trying to think of some ways that we can be better at engaging employers, be better at serving employers, and again, while at exactly the same time, making inclusive workplaces better for our clientele. So there's a lot of different levels of this presentation, but I like to think that the content in this presentation can be applied across the employment service that you work at, in whole or in part. There are parts that leadership can address, and there are concepts we'll discuss that just as readily career and employer engagement practitioners can incorporate elements into their work as well. I'm going to move into the slide. Marcus already talked a little bit about me, so I won't do that anymore because that's the most boring part of this. If at any point you want to contact me, my email is here, my Twitter address is here. Feel free to connect anytime. I don't mind answering questions or having follow-up conversations on any of this material. I find that kind of stuff quite enjoyable. So feel free to reach out if you would like to. So this is the model I want to talk about today. I'm joking. This is not a model we're going to talk about. I don't even know what this picture is. I assume some sort of quantum physics equation. What I'm trying to point out here is there's a lot of complexity to our work. We're doing a lot of things all the time. We're engaging and supporting people with a wide range of employment barriers and diagnoses in journeys of self-discovery and career development. We're engaging them and supporting employers to increase their capacity for employment accessibility and inclusion. We're building effective teams, evaluating our impact, doing ongoing research and development, and trying to affect positive policy change. There's a lot that we are doing as individuals, as teams, as organizations, a lot of moving parts to this work. And unfortunately, as a result of that, we don't always get the time to really reflect and evaluate and improve. And I think that's what this opportunity is right now. When we are collaborating, when we're getting together and having discussions about our work, I really view that as invaluable opportunities for us to really kind of self-evaluate and evaluate our organizational processes and mindsets a little bit. So this is reflective of a parable from India about a group of blind men who come across an elephant, and they all decide what it is by touching the animal. It's a spear, a fan, a wall, a tree trunk, a rope. Our lesson here is that unless we're getting all of the information and assessing issues in their entirety and from all angles, we can lose track of what we're looking at. And we can get lost in somewhat incomplete perspectives that don't let us perform to our full potential. So to that end, when we look at all of what we see in our careers, working as employment inclusion practitioners, employer engagement professionals, when we look at all that we see and all that we do, there's an amazing body of experience and work around workplace culture and workplace inclusion. I have 8 colleagues right now in Calgary, and our total experience with employers, with supervision, with workplace culture, equates to over 100 years of experience in workplace culture. So the things that we're learning on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, what are the most significant factors in inclusive workplaces and employee retention? What kinds of supervisory styles work and don't work? What processes are more effective at training people and retaining people? We all see so much of this. We're spending at times hours, days, weeks, even months job coaching people at work sites and looking at the way people interact. And we're taking note of all of this stuff. We're seeing all of this stuff. And I want to talk about what we could be doing with it a bit more. So things we've been witness to: workplace cultures that get or don't get inclusion, supervisory styles that work or don't work, workplace accommodations, mentorship, factors in employee engagement, retention, onboarding and training methods. These are all things that we're being witness to. Each of our teams has an open window into workplace cultures, hundreds of workplace cultures. And we continue to have these direct interactions, observations, and insights on a weekly basis with employers and workplaces. And I would assert, and I have yet to have anyone correct me on this. I've said this a lot of times, and I'm waiting for somebody to challenge it. But I don't think that there's a single entity out there that sees more workplace culture than we do in this sector. And given how interested employers are in diversity and inclusion, I think that what that means is that we have an incredible body of valuable experience and information that we're not really leveraging to the full extent that we could. So that's kind of the main purpose of this presentation, is to really explore that. So what do we do with all of the knowledge that we get? We're in and out of workplaces, we're talking to employers, colleagues, mentors, And this, again, it's invaluable information. And typically what's happening is it's just going into our collective memory. It's going into anecdotes that we tell around the lunchroom table. It's going into case notes. But if that's all we're doing with it, then really we're not doing much with it. We're finding what many HR professionals would consider to be absolute treasure, and we're burying it. We're not necessarily leveraging this information the way that we really could. We know that employers don't know everything they need to know about inclusion. We know it's on their agenda, and we could be helping employers with this on a lot deeper level. And we do. For those of us out there that think, I'm not a diversity and inclusion expert, but you've been working for 5 or 10 years in the employment inclusion of people with disabilities. If you don't think you're an expert, I don't know who you think is the expert. I talk to HR people all the time, and even HR people that I consider to be absolute heroes and mentors, people that have, 35 years of HR experience. When I hear them talk about diversity and inclusion, it's like listening to a grade 1 kid talk about diversity and inclusion compared to people in our sector and how much we know about this. Let's look at our purpose and our mission. We've been trained and conditioned as a sector to direct our efforts to the people that we're funded to serve. We, unfortunately, are occupying a culture of disability-focused services, advocacy, and interventions where community sometimes is a secondary recipient of our services. Our training, our policies, our language, our work routines, assessments, service plans are heavily, if not exclusively, disability-focused. However, these 3 bullets equally reflect the service that we need to provide to the job seekers that we're serving and to the community if we want inclusion. When we talk about community inclusion, we really need to consider the word community in there, and what are we doing to support community? We support people with disabilities all the time to be part of the community, but if we're not supporting community to effectively include people with disabilities, then the only people who are going to get included are the ones that are accessing our services, and we just become lifelong paid advocates for people, which isn't really the way to move the needle. That's the way to move the needle for the people that are fortunate enough to have our services, but it's not the way to move the needle right across society. So what do we on an ongoing basis need to do better to assess, understand, and deliver on the inclusion needs of employers? Perspective. The people that we are funded to serve have barriers and support needs. Of course, we need to specialize. The workplaces whose inclusion we seek to improve have barriers and support needs, and we need to specialize there as well. Both of these things are equally true, and we need to not just know that and acknowledge it, we need to consider how can we embed that knowledge into our services and better support employers so that they can become inclusion champions and do some of the work that we're doing so that we can have a broader impact on the clientele that we're trying to serve. So again, what are we trying to achieve? What are all employers trying to achieve when they hire someone? Great talent matches, investment in the job, work performance, engagement, social inclusion, fitting in at work, a valued role, employees who are independent, job retention. That's what we're trying to get done. Employers are trying to achieve the exact same things we are, and it really struck me years ago that there is no departure. We are in 100% complete alignment, and we don't always talk about it. I think this is something that we miss a little bit. I think it's worth saying to every employer that we're engaging with, there's no part of what you're trying to achieve that we aren't trying to achieve. Our vision of success is that you feel like this is a success. That is really important. What else can we be doing to help employers with the work that they have to do, though? So I'm just asking all of these questions, and sometimes the questions can seem a little bit overwhelming. But if we can group all of this together and simplify it with one question, I think that one question would be, do we as a sector have the capacity to develop and position ourselves as workplace diversity and inclusion experts? Because let's face it, disability is diversity. And in truth, I think that disability is one of the best inclusion hacks on the planet. Every time we help a person with a disability get a job and help employers look at their processes and see the barriers and see the flaws, every time we help an employer understand plain language and communicate with more clarity and efficacy to the people that we're placing in that workplace, that employer becomes a better employer and they become better at diversity and inclusion. We actually have a remarkable situation here where for the first time in history, diversity and inclusion is being highlighted by so many employers as so important to them. And they all keep saying the same thing. We understand why, we understand what, we don't understand how. And what do we do 7 days a week, if not how? We do the how part. We need to take a bigger role in diversity and inclusion in the workplace and to accept that we are actually the experts. So slight pivot, would a service that provides tools, resources, and coaching to help employers improve inclusion, engagement, and retention at work be more likely to engage employers, be more likely to achieve outcomes for job seekers, and have a greater impact on employment inclusion? We assume that what we're doing is what employers need, but all of the current researches suggest that most employers still are struggling with the how part of inclusion. And I really think we have an opportunity to be teaching them that part. Really what I consider to be an unprecedented opportunity to engage employers in something that they want more than they've ever wanted it before. So here's just a quick example of that, just looking at how we learn at work. And this is an easy thing for us to do. Everybody has, sorry about this, folks. I just need to make this go away. So everybody has access to the internet. Everybody has access to amazing tools and information. And it's very easy to look at what are some of the websites and resources around workplace culture that we can kind of study and figure out ways to help employers with things. So one of the things that I've been really focusing on is how do people learn at work? What is workplace culture comprised of? What are all of the little components that make up a workplace culture? So this concept, sourcing tools for ourselves is something we've gotten really good at. But what if we endeavored to learn as much about work as we know about disability and then intentionally support employers to build their capacity to be more effective at the things that inclusion needs? So things like clear communication, things like mentorship, workplace accommodations. We have actually, in services I've been involved with, looked at exactly that. So we've looked at how do people learn at work, and really what we're seeing is kind of bottom of the screen here, work routines and social learning. And very many of you have probably been involved with employers and helped people develop lists, sometimes picture lists, things like that. Social learning is a really important part of this too. And one of the things that we often come up against as employment inclusion professionals is employers saying, we want you to essentially train this person. And they almost want to outsource the inclusion of an employee with a disability. And what we need to be explaining to employers, and maybe even giving them some written primer documents, which I have, and it's easy to develop stuff like that, but giving an employer a written primer document that outlines the fact that training is the single biggest factor in retention, and addressing training well, including social learning, having mentors and colleagues that are exchanging information with a new employee, making sure that they're included, that they're hearing all of the little things that we don't write down. You've all been trained at work, and you all know how much you learned from your colleagues. That's a really important thing. So if we can create a little primer tool that we can give to an employer that explains this is how people learn at work, this is why training is very, very important to retention, here are some pieces of advice we can give you to help do better at onboarding a person with a disability that you can actually use in terms of onboarding anyone. That can be a really useful thing to employers. So that's just a quick example how we can provide information to employers and make ourselves more valuable, while at the exact same time making that a more welcoming and effective workplace for the people that we're serving. The disconnect. I can't tell you how much it saddens me to know that I've been talking about this disconnect for the better part of 20 years, and I still see it quite a bit. I think there's a lot of employers out there who still don't know who we are, and there's a real misunderstanding about what is the work that we do. And unfortunately, I think we played a big role in that as a sector, because for a long time we've been describing our work incorrectly to employers. Very, very few employers are covering all of their bases in terms of inclusion, engagement, performance, and retention strategies. They know it and they want help with it, and they're not necessarily see us as the valuable resource that we are. And again, we're just uniquely positioned to be far more valuable to the Canadian workplace than we're being seen as right now. Here's one of the reasons why I know there's a disconnect. If you look at this Canadian talent sourcing channel chart, and this is a few years old, but not really old, we don't even appear as a designation on this chart. So the blue bar is Canadian, and you can see a lot of employee referrals, community colleges, state and public universities, competitors, diverse professional associations, Ivy Leagues, employee resource groups, business resource networks, customers, high schools, diversity colleges, military connections, supplies, and other. I'm pretty sure that our entire sector falls into that 6% of other. I don't think that we're really showing up on here as a place that employers go to. And it's disconcerting to me when I'm speaking at, for instance, the Chartered Professionals in Human Resources conference out here in Alberta a couple years ago, and we were doing a diversity and inclusion panel, and HR professionals in the audience, experienced HR professionals, started putting up their hands saying, how do I find organizations that I can source diversity through? How do I find those organizations that are helping Indigenous people, that are helping people with disabilities to find jobs? Like, where do I even go to find you? And sadly, and if there's any funders on the line, I'm sorry for what I'm about to say next. Sadly, administrative dollars are seen as a little bit of an evil in the funding community. And unfortunately, it's those administrative dollars that help us promote ourselves, that help us to develop good websites, to develop marketing campaigns, to reach out to those employers and engage them. So that's a piece that we need to find some clever ways to do. And it's one of the reasons why some of you, the last time you saw me talk, I was talking about telling our stories and communication strategies, because that stuff is really important as well. The other reason we know there's a disconnect is that over the last 20 years, actually probably more than the last 20 years, the employment participation statistics of people with disabilities in Canada hasn't moved more than 2 or 3 percentage points up and down. So it just continues to hover overall around 50% employment for people with disabilities, and far worse if you have different types of disabilities, in particular people with intellectual disabilities and people with mental health disabilities are far more likely to be unemployed. And that isn't changing. Despite all of the work we've been doing for the last 25 years, we haven't put a solid dent in that. And again, I think one of the reasons is that we're constantly performing as paid advocates instead of spreading our knowledge and creating citizen advocates across the community that can then take on some of our work and that feel like their capacity to facilitate inclusion is really solid and has been built. So we can't talk about this kind of stuff without talking about brand. So I love this quote: brand is a story embedded in the mind of the market. And I would ask you to consider what is our brand? When we consider our market being employers, what is their story about us? Who do they think that we are? Within the context of engagement challenges and a disconnect between employers and service providers, we really do need to address the issue of our sector's collective brand. So who actually is our market, and what do they think of us? What do we want them to think about us? And how do we need to interact and communicate to make that happen? Because you can write and promote whatever you want, but at the end of the day, people will decide your brand based on how you interact and how you serve them. So we do need to consider that. I think that our sector is a little bit guilty of what I would just call a brand fail. And I'm sorry if I sound harsh about this, but I do see a lot of service providers conveying their services in a way that I think that really resonates with families, with funders, with people with disabilities. I see no reason why that would resonate with an employer. And so we really need to consider how we describe our work. Even things as simple as how we talk about ourselves, the job titles we give ourselves sometimes. So think a little bit about what are the things that you hear from community members or employers about the work you do? What are the things that kind of make you cringe when people talk about the work that they do? When people talk about the work you do, and they're framing that back at you. What are the things that you're hearing? What are the most common ways your average Joe and Jill public, what are the ways they think about your work? And I'm wondering if people just want to type some of those things into chat boxes, we can have a quick little discussion about that. Again, the things that make you cringe, some of the stuff that comes to mind for me, I'll start this off, is, well, you're a special angel from God. That is not something that makes me happy about the work that I do. It's a very sweet and flattering comment, but it doesn't really capture the value of people with disabilities, that they would be so difficult to work with, that I must be a deeply special person. Those are the kinds of things that strike me. When employers say, we could never hire a person like that here, we don't have insurance to cover that. Think about the kinds of cringe creating comments that you've heard over the years and what that says about our brand. And I'm trying to see if I can see any comments in a chat box, and I don't think I can. So I'm going to rely.
Would you like me to read them out to you?
Thank you so much.
Isla J says, I could never do the work you do.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is a sad thing, because in order for inclusion to happen, everybody needs to be able to do the work we do a little bit.
Right. Shelley Andrew says, so nice you were looking for jobs for those people.
Those people. I want us to hang on to that a little bit. Those people. Remember that.
Jane says, it's too bad you can't pre-screen for mental issues before you hire.
Yep, that's a little bit offensive.
Denine says, I think it was way better when they lived in facilities or institutions. Oh my goodness.
That's one of the most exclusionary comments I've ever heard.
Yeah. Loretta says, you must have a lot of patience.
It does take a lot of patience to hear a lot of comments like that. Yeah.
Carlton says, it must be such a rewarding job, what you do.
Yeah.
And Shelley also added, what's in it for me?
What's in it for me? Nice.
And MJ, sorry, I think you might have missed MJ. Ashley said, "I am not sure if I can hire you for safety reasons because of hearing loss." The whole safety reason stuff.
Right.
Yep. That's a very common concept. I think a lot of times when we're talking to employers or community members, their concept of what disability is just completely irrational. 20% of our population identifies as having some type of disability. So all of the people saying these things already know and probably love somebody with a disability. And I wonder who it is they're talking about and thinking about. Anything else, Ashley? Marcus?
Yeah. Jeff added, we can't afford the cost of providing accommodation.
Right.
And Megan Marshall asked a question. She said, can you clarify what you mean by the title/job title we in this field give to ourselves?
Sure. So years ago, the people that we were sending out to engage with employers and to promote individuals seeking work, we had right on their business card marketer. And I can't see you all, but if we were in a room together, I would say, raise your hand if you wanted to be marketed to. And none of you would raise your hand because no one wants to be marketed to. So yeah, when we talk about job marketer, those kinds of titles, we need to kind of consider what are we writing there, and we need to consider what are titles that would resonate with an employer. So rather than marketer, I like to think of titles like diversity and engagement consultant or workplace inclusion strategist. What are the kinds of things that would actually resonate, given what we're trying to achieve and who our target audience is? What kind of messages would resonate with them for the engagement process that we need to do? So I'm just going to move on to the next slide here and say these are some of the things that I see our disability services brand having as gaps. So our current brand is really about us being professional advocates with an agenda to help people with disabilities. And I would simply ask, what about that is engaging to non-disabled employers, especially those smaller employers that don't know a lot about diversity and inclusion and whose livelihoods may actually depend on good hires? We are disability advocates. What about that resonates to employers like that? And what are we saying either intentionally or accidentally about our role that maybe is actually creating a bit of a barrier to engagement? So I don't think that these things listed here, I don't think that they really fully reflect our vision, which again is just what we reflect sometimes is paid advocacy versus citizen advocacy. And if we're looking for an inclusive society, then really, again, folks, we are trying to create new advocates. We're not trying to be the only advocates. We're trying to inspire other people to become disability and diversity inclusion advocates themselves. This is what we were always trying to do, right? We've all of us say in our mission and our mandate that we want inclusive societies, and our vision is a world where everyone is valued equally, blah, 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 blah. In order for that to happen, we actually have to talk to the world just as much as we talk to people with disabilities. And we have to support that world to be a more inclusive world, because that is actually the way to get more of the folks that we are serving into the world and benefiting from the same opportunities that we do. So unfortunately, the sad, brutal truth for me about disability services sector brand is basically this. This is what all of those comments that I saw listed, I feel like your average person in Canadian society that we're encountering would describe us as you people serving those people. And I'm sorry if that sounds harsh, but that is really what I've been seeing over the last 25, 30 years of my career. And I think that we are actually complicit in this if we're not taking steps to challenge this and find language that engages people better, then we're actually a little bit complicit in it. And when I say we're complicit in it, one of the pieces of evidence I would have is that we have literally spent, as a sector, not every single organization, not every single professional, but generally speaking, as a sector, we've spent the last 35 years telling community, we help people with disabilities. And that doesn't say what we do. That's a very medical model, care provider model kind of commentary. And it's not about making communities stronger through diversity and inclusion. So organizational brand. And brand, really, we're just talking about people, how people feel and think about our organization, its mission, its work, and its responsiveness. That is what brand is. I'm not talking about your logo. I'm talking about what you communicate intentionally or unintentionally about your work, and what the impact of that work is intended to be. What is our brand promise? If we are engaging with an employer, with community, as an organization, what is our promise to that person or that company? I think we need to consider that because we don't very much. I've looked at so many disability inclusion websites across the country. I've spoken at so many conferences, talked to so many people, and I don't think that we have a prepared, this is what you will get if you engage with our organization. We will build your capacity for diversity and inclusion. We will help you see that diversity leads to innovation, employment retention, productivity. All of the research shows this, and we can actually coach you through it and help you with it. We need to really think about how we describe ourselves and describe our work. So how can we do some of that? Brand evaluation is a really simple thing that you can do. I would call everything I've learned about this a do-it-yourself exercise over the last several years. If you Google brand evaluation or nonprofit branding strategy, you will come up with over 500,000 hits on the internet. And brand evaluation is really just about taking the time to assess, who are you as an organization? Who do you actually want to be? Who is your audience, the people that you need to engage? And what's your call to action to that audience? And what is your value proposition or your brand promise? How do you show people what you do and why you do it, rather than just tell them? A lot of us have a lot of text on our websites that talk about things in very theoretical terms, and we need to get much better at telling our stories and showing employers what we do and why we do those things. So in order to do that kind of stuff, organizations need to take some time to cut out a little bit of time to really open a dialogue themselves or organizationally with themselves, their staff, their clientele, their stakeholders, and literally ask people, send out a survey, do a Survey Monkey thing, send it out via email. Hey, how would you describe us? How would you describe our organization? How would you describe our purpose? What do you think we're strong at? What do you think we need to get better at? If we were a person, describe our personality. If you start collecting that information from a whole bunch of people and you're not happy with the results, then you might need to change some of your communications and the way you talk about your work a little bit. It's also really easy if you have a lot of social media content. Study do a bit of a social media audit. Where are you getting the most traction? What kinds of things are you saying online that are most engaging to people? Think about that stuff a little bit. So brand evaluation can really expose our actual strengths, as well as the things that are just assumptions and things that are really communication gaps for us. So designing your brand, because this is something you can do. You can actually design that concept of brand as a story embedded in the mind of a market. You can shape that story. And I think I've said this earlier, it's as simple as, based on what we're trying to achieve, who do we need to talk to and interact with, and what messages or engagement style matters to them. If we're not conducting how we interact and engage with employers based on these questions, then we're just kind of winging it. And quite frankly, we're working too hard to just be winging it. We can't afford to just work hard and not work smart. So I want to talk about things that we could teach and support employers to do. So what are some of the things that we are doing to directly facilitate the inclusion of people with disabilities in a new work environment? So think about the career exploration, helping people to really identify a job that matters to them, helping people that don't have the confidence or the resources to go out and seek jobs that they can apply for. What are some of the things that we're doing to directly facilitate the inclusion of people like those kinds of things, but in the new work environment? Once people start work, what are we doing to support them? Feel free to just type some things and share some things.
James added, providing support on the job while a new employee gets settled.
Yep. And that has a lot of pieces to it, right? Providing support on the job can be about connecting that person with other colleagues, with mentorship. It can be helping them learn the workplace culture, helping them understand the job description, sitting with them, watching training videos, going through orientation manuals. There's a lot of pieces to that. What else?
Denine added, try to help them converse with their coworkers and find common ground amongst them.
Yep. So helping a new employee to connect with other employees in that work environment. Anything else coming up?
Yeah. Somebody said we do job coaching and follow up after the job coach phases out. We stay in touch with the employer and the client to ensure things are going well.
Yep. And what does some of that stuff look like? So that follow-up, when I think of the follow-up supports that we're providing to employers, I'm thinking of things like troubleshooting any kind of difficulty. I'm thinking about employers phoning us to say, hey, based on this person's disability and what you know about that, is it okay if they come on the staff retreat with us? Can they come to a conference with us? Like sometimes we're answering questions about disability and helping employers understand that on a deeper level. Sometimes we're helping employers design workplace accommodations and researching what is an accommodation that will work for this person. Anything else, Ashley?
Yeah, so MJ added that we provide brief awareness session on specific disabilities for staff and employers to understand better.
Nice. Go ahead, keep listing them off.
That's it right now, but I'll let you know
Okay.
if there's more.
Okay, thank you. So what I would like for us to kind of explore about this, I'm wondering if these things that we are doing to facilitate the inclusion of people with disabilities in a new work environment are those things that we can help an employer understand. If for instance, we're helping a person read through an orientation manual and we point out to the employer, hey, your orientation manual has a lot of jargon and a lot of difficult to understand concepts that obviously were written by people who have already worked here for a long time. Can we recommend some sort of plain language overhaul? And if you don't have the resources to do that, could we maybe help you with some of that? One of the things that I see a lot placing people with disabilities in a work environment is that there's not even a job description attached. Well, how do we know if we don't have a job description and there's no particular performance measurements in place? How do we know if the person that we're serving is successful in the environment or not? We talked a little bit about connecting people with others in the work environment. And I guess I'm wondering, are these not all things that we can teach an employer to do? Can we not teach employers that clear expectations, that social learning, that work routines, that clear performance measures and communication around achievement of those performance measures or not, that those are actually things that serve all employees? Is that not something that we can have conversations about and help build the employer's capacity while also making it an easier place for the clientele that we serve to work? So this is sort of my moment in the presentation where I say, really, disability is diversity, and we are, whether we like it or not, we are diversity and inclusion specialists. I was just reading a report from an organization called Institute for Corporate Prosperity that did a big study across the United States on all these organizations that hired people with intellectual disabilities. And one of the questions they asked employers was, did hiring and including a person with an intellectual disability improve your diversity and inclusion competency across your organization? And 50% of the employers said, yes, absolutely. This did actually make us a more inclusive employer. And given, again, how important diversity and inclusion has become in the workplace, how important it's become with HR people across the globe, I think we have to acknowledge we are subject matters in something that's very important to employers. We're subject matters in workplace inclusion strategies. And most importantly, it's not theoretical. We're subject matters in the direct how-to part of this. And I think it's worth saying that, and maybe this is just because we're working with a population that is marginalized and undervalued. Maybe it's seeped into us a little bit on some psychological subconscious level, that we just seem to have a little bit of career low self-esteem and don't fully understand the incredible value that we have as diversity and inclusion experts. We have a lot to offer right now. We're absolutely subject matter experts. And if you think that somebody else knows more about it, please send me an email and tell me who, because I'd like to meet them. So far in my entire career, the people I know who have the most experience with facilitating diversity and inclusion are people just like you. You're helping employers and organizations leverage diversity and human capital every day. So how can we be more intentional about this? How can we actually say it, step into the light, and own it in order to engage employers more effectively? We have the next slide is on the future of work, and I think we're going to stop for just a 5-minute break. This is more than halfway through this presentation, but if people want to take a bathroom break, get a glass of water, fresh cup of coffee, do a little bit of yoga, whatever works for you. Does that sound all right, Marcus and Ashley?
Yeah, that sounds great. Yep. So it's, what time is it now? 1:20. How about 1:20? Sorry, what time is it?
It's 11:20.
2:25 right now. Yeah. So, well, we're all in different time zones, so we'll just say 5 minutes. I don't want to confuse people.
I'm not going to take a 2.5-hour break. No.
Yeah. So we'll say 5 minutes, and we'll all be back.
Okay. Perfect.
Thanks, Sean.
And you just hashtag future of work, all one word, and search it, you'll see a lot of really important information there. I'm just going to throw out, if you don't use Twitter and you want to know more about workplace culture, there is so much information there. If you just hashtag things like workplace, future of work, HR, diversity and inclusion, you're going to get links to resources that can really help you. So I'm just going to quickly throw that out. So the future of work is a thing that we need to talk about as a sector, because it's at least 50% of our service focus, and it's not something that we spend a lot of time actually focusing on. And this may be the single biggest issue for us as a sector right now, because work is changing really fast. when people are starting to pay attention to not just getting work, but what is work. And when I say people, I'm talking about employers, businesses, the science and study of what makes work effective for people and what gets the most out of people to make companies more profitable, to help with sustainability. That stuff is really on everybody's radar right now, and it needs to be on ours as well, because we need to be speaking language that resonates with people. As I said earlier, work is changing fast. It's changing faster than our methodology to help people get work is actually changing. There's new technology all the time, new skills that are required to solve problems. Some of those problems, we don't even know what they are yet. That's a really common thing that we hear talking to HR people and thought leaders in the area of work, is we're going to have work problems in 5 years that we haven't even conceived of at this point. And if you want to look at how fast work is changing, look at 1 year ago today. What were you doing? How were you engaging people? What were priorities for employers? How is that right now? It's very different. Things can change really fast, and we need to be fairly agile. When we look at demographics and work, that's a really important thing. Right now, over 35% of our workforce is comprised of millennials. And one of the things that research and studies show about millennials is that, in general, millennials care more about diversity and inclusion than other generations, except for Gen Z, who are the younger people that are coming up. So millennials will be 50% of our workforce by 2025, and they care about diversity and inclusion. So that is something that we need to consider when we're talking to employers. We need to consider these demographics, and we're going to talk more about those demographics right now. I truly believe that we're in a position to be able to say to business that disability can future-proof a business. And this is a big part of some of the work that I'm doing with an organization called Hire for Talent right now, looking at disability as an opportunity for companies to future-proof their business. So what am I talking about there? Employers can really expect to accommodate workers with disabilities. When we help an employer hire a person with a disability, we do look at what, if any, kinds of workplace accommodations will this person need. And that might be looking at strengths-based employment, the things that they're better at, and doing more of that, less of the things that they're not good at. It might be things in the work environment that need to be explained better or put into plain language. It might be more social inclusion and social learning through mentorship. These kinds of things, as they're happening, teach an employer more about diversity and inclusion. Just as I talked about earlier, that I4CP report, where employers all reported, or 50% of them reported, that hiring a person with a disability made them better at diversity and inclusion. These are some of the things that are happening in our workforce. We're going to lose 25% of our workforce over the next 10 to 15 years. 25% of Canadians currently working are going to disappear out of that workforce in the next 10 to 15 years. And every indication statistically is that our birth rate is nowhere near going to keep up with it. So that's about a 5 million person hole in the Canadian workplace. And there's only one way that it's getting replaced. It's getting replaced with diversity groups, with millennials, Gen Z, new Canadians, Indigenous Canadians, and people with disabilities. That's the 5 million person replacement workforce. The replacement workforce for the people that are going to leave in the next 10 to 15 years, all diversity or diversity minded. So that's something we really need to consider. We need to consider that helping employers to see the flaws and barriers in their systems really helps them, and helps them to become a better employer supervisor. Like, we need to be leveraging this stuff with employers. I think to say diversity and inclusion isn't just a nice thing to have, it's literally a sustainable workforce strategy. If you're an employer right now in 2020 and you intend to still be here in 10 years and you've got 500 people working for you, say 600, because I can do the math on that easier, 150 of those people are going to disappear on you over the next 10 years. And I would ask, who are you going to replace them with? Because you're probably going to be replacing them with diversity groups. So if you don't start getting good at diversity and inclusion now, where will that leave you? Is your business going to be sustainable? Do you have a sustainable workforce strategy? And I know a group that knows a lot about diversity and inclusion in a very practical how-to sense, and that can set employers up with diversity and then kind of coach them to be better and more inclusive workplaces. And yeah, it's us. It's absolutely us. Disability is the group that can help employers to build the capacity that they'll need to attract and retain workers in the future of work. There's no reason for us to not be talking about this and thinking of ways to leverage it, thinking about ways to put it into our pitch, thinking about ways to build it into our services. We are literally going to help the Canadian workforce with sustainable workforce strategies by helping them hire people with disabilities. It's a fact. I think as well, to be letting employers know that they often see disability as some sort of flaw or impairment on the part of the person. And I think we need to get really good at pitching. I think we need to get really good at educating employers and kind of helping them to understand the diversity group that we're serving a little bit better. So A, diversity and inclusion is a sustainable workforce strategy, and B, disability and diversity are strengths. So disability is diversity. It's the fastest growing diversity on the planet, actually, with currently 1.3 billion people identifying as having a disability, and they're worth about $8 trillion in the global market. So not just hiring people with disabilities, but also think about the families and friends of people with disabilities. Think about, as a customer base, accommodating and being accessible to customers with disabilities. And hiring people with disabilities can help employers do that. People make a lot of false assumptions about disability and their limitations all the time because they just simply don't know as much about disability as we do. And I think what we need to be communicating to employers on a very frequent basis is that disability does not negate a person's strengths and passions and what they have to offer. Disability is a little part of a person. People with disabilities are actually brilliant problem solvers because people with disabilities have been solving problems for themselves their whole lives that the rest of us haven't even had to think about. So that brings a diversity of thought to the table that makes them good problem solvers. And as we discussed earlier, we're going to need to solve problems in the world of work that we haven't even thought of yet. So for employers to start to get good at this now and use us to help them with that, this is a really, really important workforce strategy. I want to talk a little bit about diversity and inclusion and including that in how we communicate our work as well. Diversity and inclusion, and again, please recognize, please hear me that you are a diversity and inclusion specialist. What does that mean? It means you're bringing these things to the table. It means that you, your organization, and the people you serve are a key driver of innovation and global success. That diversity and inclusion, that what we represent is crucial for attracting and retaining top talent. We need to also recognize responsibility for that success lies with management. So being able to have those conversations very succinctly and effectively with leaders, that's going to become an important skill for us too. And I think a lot of the people, probably most of the people that are working in the employer engagement sort of element of our field are probably already doing that stuff. It's also worth knowing most companies feel like they're falling short in disability. And again, we can help with that. And there's so many reasons why we have value in this regard. bottom line argument, companies with inclusive talent practices in hiring, promotion, development, leadership, and team management generate up to 30% higher revenue per employee and greater profitability than their competitors. This is a statement that we should be including in some way in our pitch constantly. Hiring people with disabilities literally makes a company more profitable. Why wouldn't we do more of that? And I think the business case for diversity and inclusion should be something that every single one of us should be able to do. I don't care if you're a leader at the organization, a career consultant, a job coach, an employer engagement specialist. We all need to be familiar with this language and to be able to talk to community about this is what we do. We make workplaces more profitable through inclusion. We help workplaces become stronger by leveraging diversity and inclusion. And we teach them how to do that right across the board through the transformative lens of disability. Language like that, I think, will resonate a lot more with employers than I help people with disabilities. Human capital is defined as the collective skills, knowledge, or other intangible assets of individuals that can be used to create economic value for the individuals, their employers, or their community. This is why diversity is important, because divergent thinking and diverse perspectives and strengths, different approaches to problem solvings, all of these things make teams and workplaces stronger and more adaptable. This is what we're bringing to the table. We're not just getting people with disabilities jobs and patting ourselves on the back about it and walking away. We are making workplaces stronger, and it's not right for us to fail to talk about that. That's our product. These success stories, every success story, workplace success story that we facilitate, this is what we've done. We've helped workplaces leverage human capital through diversity and inclusion. I love this comment because it really explains the why of what we do. Strength lies in differences, not similarities. If you've heard me speak before, you've heard me ask the question, what do you call 12 corn farmers stranded on a desert island surrounded by fish? Dead. They're corpses because none of them know how to do anything except farm corn. We have to have different people at the table. We have to have diversity. It's what makes us stronger as a group. It's what helps humans to survive throughout the millennia, is our ability to leverage different knowledge and work with each other and collaborate with each other and work together to achieve great things. So this comment, while diversity of thought and experience leads to better problem solving in a workplace, the reasoning behind diversity fails if we really don't effectively address how people get included at work. There are a lot of employers that are trying hard to think of diversity as just counting. And I love the quote, diversity is counting people, inclusion is making people count. So it's that second part of the equation that's really important for us to consider. So, workplace culture, something that we need to get good at, knowing about workplace culture and employee engagement. Workplace culture and diversity and inclusion, all of those hours, months, years that we spend witnessing it, experiencing it, and thinking about it, how are we supporting employers with that? All of that knowledge that is just, we're just absorbing it all the time, but not necessarily finding a way to process it and project it back out in a supportive way to employers. How do we support employers with that? And I'm sure that's a question a lot of us have on our minds, like all of this knowledge, how do I turn that in to employer supports and how do I communicate that? So here are some things that we can be thinking about. Employment accessibility, which is a huge thing right now. If you look at federal legislation, the Canadian Accessibility Act, you look at that stuff, how easy is it for diversity to even get in the door? You all know how easy it is for diversity to get in the door because you're serving that population, and you know that there are barriers. You know that people will be screened out If they can't do an electronic online application, they might get screened out because their last name doesn't look Canadian enough to some employers. Employment accessibility is a real thing. Training and orientation and mentorship. You know, how many employers have you placed people with and the employer had no real plan for training and orienting people? And that can be a real problem when you're hiring people. And how informed are employers about why that matters and how to address that issue more effectively? I think when we're seeing those things, we need to kind of step in and say, we're going to do a little bit of extra work here to help this employer get a grasp of these things, but it's going to be worth it, because the next time they want to hire somebody that has a barrier, they're going to know how to do it better. And that's how we have a broader impact. Engagement and inclusion. How important is a sense of belonging at work? How bad is exclusion for a workplace? Anyone who's done any kind of research or studying around things like workplace harassment, discrimination, and bullying knows that exclusion can be absolutely devastating to an individual. And if things go the wrong way bad enough, it can be pretty devastating for the employer as well. So in terms of our role supporting employers, I think we should all be very, very familiar with workplace harassment and bullying legislation, because a lot of those things have changed over the recent years. I know in Alberta, 2 years ago, there were some major changes to the workplace harassment and discrimination and bullying elements of the occupational health and safety standards here. And most employers are still completely unaware of those changes. Most employers are unaware of the fact that they are supposed to maintain a body or group that monitors workplace culture and discrimination and bullying, and proactively have strategies and policies to address that. Employment retention. What does it cost to replace people? If you have a bad workplace culture and people are leaving, what's it actually costing you to replace those people? And the statistics on that are ugly, because even a 20-year-old person with a grade 12 education who's leaving a job at Tim Hortons, even that is costing the employer more than a month's salary in costs. For people that are actually veteran employees and been there for a long time, it costs them a lot more. And these are in fact things that we can be subtly helping employers with, and even communicating to them clearly, we can help with this. There's a lot that we know about work, but don't always leverage or give ourselves credit for. We're seeing a lot of this stuff, and we actually are getting paid to serve people, both people with disabilities and employers, and address some of these things, because addressing some of these things is the way that we are serving both of those groups. So I want to talk a little bit about workplace culture and how much it matters. Sometimes workplace culture is toxic. In fact, across the board, the state of workplace culture is abysmal. And we have something to say here. As diversity and inclusion experts, we can very easily say to an employer that, hey, workplace culture really, really matters. And workplace culture can either have a profound impact on your success for good or bad. And so if there are ways that we can help employers with that, I believe that we should be doing that, and we should be talking to them about it and providing them with resources at the very least. As it stands right now, only 31% of Canadians identify as fully engaged at work. And most workplaces are far too focused on just the day-to-day operational facts of life and issues to realize that their failure to address certain strategic issues like workplace culture are in fact creating some of their biggest problems. And this doesn't even take into account the new problems that are coming our way in the future of work. Diversity and inclusion really help to improve workplace culture, and this is demonstrated if you can help a workplace to effectively recruit diversity and include diversity and talk to them about, this is respectful language that will work for this person and make them feel welcomed and make them really thrive. If we can be doing that sort of through the lens of disability, we can really be helping employers with that workplace culture. So that work, if we can kind of intentionally do a little bit of that, talk about that, I think that work really helps workplaces to become more successful and really helps them view us as the valuable resources that we are. So in terms of helping businesses be better and thinking about what are the ways that we can do that, talking about universal design is a really easy thing for us to be helping employers with. And universal design is it's a pretty simple concept, and it's one that matches our sector in terms of values and knowledge that we already have. So let's talk about this approach that simplifies diversity in all of its various incarnations. So universal design is a concept that we really should all be familiar with. And most of us probably have already facilitated it in some way, whether we know it or not. It's worth saying you don't need to be an expert in universal design. It's more of a mindset and some concepts that you can apply to help workplaces be more inclusive. And I think it's worth saying that universal design strategies and protocols, that they work for every prospective diversity hire, because at the end of the day, they're all people. So universal design is very much about people. And you might be doing universal design across a lifespan. You might be doing universal design for people that have disabilities, for people that are aging, women who are pregnant, people who broke their legs. There's different, so what we're doing right now, even, being able to work remotely and to use Zoom, even some of that is an example of universal design. One of the things that pops for me is when you see the wheelchair ramp at the mall, and you'll see people in wheelchairs use it, but you'll also see elderly people with canes, mothers or fathers with strollers and babies, people who are delivering using a dolly, heavy equipment, whatever. That's something that works for everyone. And you can do that not just physically, you can do it systemically as well. So that's worth talking about. Universal design is really just about creating systems and spaces that work for everybody across ability, culture, and lifespan. And it is worth learning about so that we can help employers more effectively include people. So what do we design? I know we're thinking, I don't design anything. We design stuff all the time. Absolutely design stuff all the time. We spend a huge amount of time at work designing strategies, processes, and systems that impact on employees and clientele. Every conversation or meeting that results in a change to how we do things has an element of design to it. And all workplaces do this, and most of them do it poorly. And the reason they do it poorly is because they're thinking of designing something that works for them as administrators of the process. They're not always thinking about designing things in ways that work for the end user. These are conversations that we're having with employers all the time. This process won't work for this person, and this is why. Here's a way that we can accommodate it to make it better. And lo and behold, 20 months later, the employer's still doing it because they realize it isn't an accommodation, it's a process that works better for everyone. That's universal design, when we do something that works for everybody. And that's the reason we're doing it, is it works for everybody. So these are some of the things that we're designing. I think that, as I said, it's a great fit for our sector. It holds common values. If we think about the barriers the people that we serve encounter, how would we categorize them? The barriers that we are encountering tend to be around policy, around practice, around culture, communication. Those are things that we're helping employers with already all the time. So universal design is a person-centered rather than a systemic approach. and it seeks to make products, environments, and systems usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without need for adaptation, and designing things in ways that work for everyone. This is an image that kind of illustrates physically what universal design can be. So you can see there are barriers and attempts in the first two slides to address barriers, and then you can see the chain link at the end. This is a way to do this that actually works for a wide range of diversity. And this works great, except if you own that baseball team and you're trying to sell tickets. It doesn't work great for them. But otherwise, it's an excellent example of universal design. So employment accessibility, employer capacity in these workplace elements are representative of the universal design. Oh, sorry, I'm being told that my computer battery is running low, but it is plugged in. I'm just going to flick a switch. I'll be right back. Sorry, folks, I had a power bar that was turned off. Okay, so if we can help employers to build capacity in these areas, then we can actually help them with some elements of universal design. And very often, engaging in simple best practices around recruitment, training, supervision, and communication will meet the criteria for universal design. So these are things that we can become familiar with. It's not only, universal design is not only about disability, but it works well for disability. And that's one of the reasons we should be thinking about it. It helps employers with all kinds of diversity and inclusion. Thinking differently about this stuff is a start, but we really need to embed that new knowledge in work routines in order to effect change. So let's talk about some of these various elements. Employment accessibility, how can we help employers with that? So job postings, helping them to be accessible, helping them look at the web accessibility standards, helping them to understand plain language, looking at them developing workarounds for people that can't effectively apply for work through the usual online strategies. What is a workaround? If we talk to employers about the fact that that really recruitment is, the current systems of recruitment are systems of exclusion. When we're receiving 100+ resumes and trying to squeeze that down to 3 interviews, we're excluding 97 people. We're looking for reasons to exclude people. And in that kind of system, the people that we are serving often lose. That's why we exist. We're helping people past that. So sometimes employment accessibility is just making an arrangement or partnership with an employer to have access to them. Interview accommodation policies, letting an employer know that if you make a policy that says that you will provide reasonable accommodation, not just for work as per the legislation, but also for interviews. If when you phone an applicant for an interview, you say, hey, we're going to do a 3-person panel interview on the 2nd floor of a walk-up building, and we're going to ask you to do a 30-minute Microsoft Excel test at the end of it. If there is any part of that that you would like to request accommodations for, it is your right to do so as per our company policy, and you can't be denied the interview for asking for that accommodation. So you can tell us now, you can think about it and call us back or email, but please know that you have the right to ask for accommodation during the interview. It took me about 30 seconds or less to say that, and it's a universal design concept that allows for anyone to ask for the accommodation they need to be more successful in that interview. Pre-interviews, employer coaching, letting employers know about the resources at Hire for Talent, for instance, letting them know about the resources at Job Accommodation Network, Ask Jan, so that they can design accommodations based on type of disability. Interview alternatives, 3-hour job trials. Some of the stuff that MentorAbility is doing actually qualifies a little bit as an employment accessibility strategy. So we are in fact helping employers with employment accessibility and they can, in fact, through that experience and learning, transfer some of those skills to other areas and other diversity types. So intentionally supporting employers with this, I think, is really important. It's not enough for us to just know that we will help an employer with something if they're asked. I think we need to let employers know, hey, here's the laundry list of things that we can help you with if you want help with it. So orientation stuff. This I think is really important, and I want us to do more about that. We spend a lot of time job coaching people, and I've always thought it's such a weird thing that the very newest person to the workplace would be in charge of training a person at a workplace. And this is where I think we really need to school employers about the need for social learning. And in order for social learning to happen, we need to be learning from people that already work there and already know that workplace. And again, single biggest factor in employee retention is their orientation and training. That is a researched fact that is worth talking to employers about. If the job expectations aren't clarified, again, how do we identify problems for success? We have literally, at organizations that I've worked at, we've literally written job descriptions for employers who didn't have them because we wanted them to be able to see this is what this position actually looks like, and we want you to be able to see that this person is meeting the criteria. So that can be helpful. Are all of these kinds of areas that you feel as an organization, as a professional, familiar with? And would these things help all employers with all new hires? Does this stuff, these 5 bullet points, do they work for everyone that an employer would hire? And I would say, yeah, I think they absolutely do. Healthy workplace cultures is another example of universal design. This is something that is really important for our clientele. I know you've probably all had the experience of having somebody get a job, and after you get them the job, you think, oh no, why did I do this? I think this might be the worst thing I've ever done to this person, is help them get this job, because the workplace culture is toxic or abusive or just so scattered that it's confusing and frustrating for the person. So healthy workplace cultures, absolutely an element of universal design that works for everyone. And some of the elements of that, cultural agility, emotional intelligence, clear leadership and expectations, civility and respect, workload management, employee engagement. These lists of things, it's not necessary that we specifically coach the employer on all of those things, but I think it is important that we provide employers that we think might need it with resources that can help them build their capacity in these areas, because it will help their workplace and it will help the person that we've just got a job there to retain that job. So we typically recognize barriers based on the ones that we have repeatedly faced or witnessed. I want to talk about cultural agility for a little bit here. The barriers that we have personally faced, or that people that we love have faced, we see those barriers, but it's very easy for employers to encounter barriers that they have no experience with. So let's say somebody who's on the autism spectrum and maybe has a significant anxiety disorder, they might be anxious about things that make no sense to that employer. But we typically end up helping the employer to understand, even though the employer doesn't see that barrier, it doesn't mean it's not real for that person. That is an incredibly good supervisory and leadership skill to have, to recognize that the issue might not be clear to you, but it's very real for that person. So how can you support them and accommodate them? That's something I think we need to get good at too, is having those conversations. Emotional intelligence is a top 10 skill for the workplace. It's an important thing for leaders to have, and we can provide resources for that if we think, an employer is really struggling with some of that, and we can have a difficult conversation where we say, we can see, based on all of the workplace culture that we see, we can see that you're having an issue in this area, and can we send you some resources in that regard? If you don't want to do anything about it, fine, but if you want some resources, here they are. We would be negligent to not send it your way. Or you can just say, we do this for everyone we work with. You can build things into your culture to help employers be better employers. So these last things, the clear leadership and expectations, civility and respect, etc., these are 4 out of 13 psychosocial indicators for the psychological health and safety at work standard, which is it's a national voluntary standard through Occupational Health and Safety, the national standard on psychological health and safety at work. And if you're unfamiliar with that standard, if you're serving people to get employment who have barriers to employment, who occasionally have mental health issues, and who occasionally we're placing in workplaces that could really use some help with having a better workplace culture, the resources associated with that psych health and safety standard, guardingmindsatwork.ca, it's right there at the bottom of the screen. Guardingmindsatwork.ca is a self-assessment that workplaces can do to see how they rate along all of these 13 psychosocial indicators. And not only can they see how they rate, but they can also get advice on what they can do to improve those ratings. So it's a super easy, do-it-yourself, anonymous tool that workplaces with, I believe, more than 12 people. So not small workplaces, because if the sample group is too small, then it's not necessarily anonymous. So for larger employers, that's a great resource for them to develop their workplace culture. And I see no reason why familiarity with the national standard on psychological health and safety in the workplace shouldn't be like a mandatory part of our knowledge as career professionals. If we're supporting people with mental health issues to get into the workplace, and sometimes those workplaces are unhealthy, we should know about the resources that can help those workplaces improve their psychological health and safety. That should just be something that we all know how to do, and resources that we're familiar with. And if you want to do a really great exercise, do it on your own organization. If you haven't used Guarding Minds at Work, try it at home, folks. Try it where you work. So really, inclusion is universal. At an individual level, everyone needs to feel included at work. This is a neuroscience fact. Our brains register exclusion as a primary threat. Our brains literally recognize social exclusion as just a significant threat as having no food, no water, no shelter. And there's a reason for that. Our species has actually survived because of social connection. So when there is no social connection, it is a threat. Our brains register it as a threat, just as significant as being without primary resources. So what that means is that inclusion is a universal need for all people. It's also worth saying that exclusion guarantees that we will fail to perform. It is virtually impossible for any worker with a disability or without to succeed in a work environment where they are constantly excluded. They will eventually, they will fail to thrive, fail to perform, and they will eventually leave that workplace or go on a very expensive stress leave. So again, what are we trying to achieve in reframing this work? Great talent matches, work performance, engagement, social inclusion, all of the things that employers are trying to achieve, all of this alignment, and leveraging our experience as workplace culture, leveraging our experience as well as workplace culture resources and tools to kind of shift our brand and engage employers in the work of creating diverse and inclusive, sustainable workplaces. I think that's the direction and evolution that our sector really needs to be going. And we need to kind of own that. We need to put it into our communications, into our marketing, into our employer services, and we need to really take an active role in projecting our services these ways. To do this really fills an important need for our target market, for employers, while enhancing the conditions for sustainable employment and inclusion in the workplace that the people we serve require. Work culture and behavior, learning about workplace culture, these kinds of things are really important elements of workplace culture. And learning about that, knowing workplace culture just as well as we know about career consulting and career exploration and job search, that stuff is important to us. It's important for us to be able to engage and maintain valuable relationships with employers and shift our brand a little bit. We have to be able to teach both clientele and employers about the recipe for workplace success. I don't think that it's reasonable that we should just consider our work done when we place people. We do all of this follow-up support to help a person fit in at work, but sometimes we're helping people to fit in to something that's already a bit broken. And I think we need to have the courage to step up and say, we can help you with this, employer. We can help you fix some of these things, and it will make your business more profitable and sustainable. And we are actually subject matter experts in this. There's so much experience here, so much experience in this sector that all of the participants that are on this line right now, we have literally centuries of experience in facilitating diversity and inclusion in the workplace. The knowledge and the resources that we need to fill some of the gaps and shift our brand a little bit is just at our fingertips. It's not hard for us to learn. And I'm going to end this presentation with a list of resources that we can all be using. I know that we're all here, not necessarily to serve employers. I know that we're all here because the people that we serve live in poverty and isolation and segregation. And we know that the scarcity of opportunity that people face sometimes just deepen a person's marginalization. And we also know that quality employment gives an abundance of opportunity, purpose, connection, and fights that marginalization. I'm not suggesting that we ever forget our roots. We know why we're here. We know what a good workplace is. And it's time for us to step up as diversity and inclusion experts and deliver what we can deliver. It's time for us to own what we know and who we are. It's also time to keep pace with the future of work and to shift what we're doing to create more value for job seekers, employers, and funders. And like it or not, that future is here. Look how fast it's changing all around us. Changing the world of work is also really hard work. So let's figure out ways to teach business what we know and to create new advocates and allies to help lead inclusion across Canada. And that's the end of my presentation, except for these resources. So the first resource is a great opportunity for you to help evaluate your brand. The second one, Unbranding, is a book by Scott Stratton that is about engagement. It's about how to more effectively engage in customers, period. And I think it's a brilliant book that would allow us, because the premise of the book is nobody wants to be marketed to. People want to find the services and products that they want and need in a very quick, easy, accessible way. And they want experts. And we can absolutely look at some of those concepts to reposition ourselves. Your Brain at Work is a book about neuroscience and how we can be better at work, how leaders can be better. I think it's a brilliant book. The Balance Careers, this is maybe the best workplace website I've ever found. thebalancecareers.com just posts article after article after article on how to do a performance review, how to do a performance improvement plan. Any possible thing you could need to help an employer with is on this website. And every single article has links to other articles. So it's basically a library of work science. If you've never been to thebalancecareers.com, do yourself a favor, start reading their articles today. Sign up for their articles to be sent to you. It's one of the most brilliant resources ever. Neuroleadership.com is connected to David Rock, who wrote Your Brain at Work. Neuroleadership.com writes a lot about diversity and inclusion at work and how neuroscience concepts can be utilized to facilitate it a bit more. Institute for Corporate Prosperity, i4cp.com, has a great report with lots of like usable graphs and visuals around the workplace inclusion of people with intellectual disabilities and the positive impacts that's had on the workplaces that they talked about. Learning circle model is just a great model to look at how do we teach ourselves, how do we use the resources of people in our existing organizations to effectively explore ideas and concepts and looking at ways of building those ideas and concepts into our work. And the final resource there is just my website, RealEyesCapacity.com. I post blogs there, articles and resources, so hopefully that can be helpful to you as well. And if we do have time left, I'll happily take questions.
Yeah, we have a little bit of time, so if there's any questions, feel free to either write them in the chat box or ask them. And I just wanted to thank you, Sean, for taking the time to do your presentation today. I think it was, I know I found it very enlightening and learned a lot. And as I was telling you before, I think I love your presentation because it challenges us to look at things a little bit differently and maybe even take it to a different level. And I think that's important. And I love the idea of inclusion is universal. You know, I think, you know, the work that we do, when we're providing inclusive advice or practices and talking to employers, that we have to realize that, you know, this is good for everybody, not just the person you may be going in and talking about. It's actually good for business. It's good for colleagues. It's good for coworkers. It's good for employers. So I think that's a good reminder. And I think we all appreciate providing those resources. We're always, I think a lot of us are continuous learners, and, you know, any kind of extra resources we can get, I think are great. And I do encourage everyone to go to his website and check it out, the RealEyes Consultants. And I would also encourage you to seek Sean out on Twitter. He's an active tweet person, Twitter person, and he does have quite a few resources on there that are great. And Sean, you'd be happy to know that there was some tweets happening about your workshop real time right now.
Oh, nice.
some positive tweets, which is always nice to see that activity. So that's a good sign.
Oh, good. Thank you. I hope nobody was commenting about my hair. Before COVID started, I had the same haircut as Marcus, and look what's happened to me.
Yeah, that's right.
Everything's just been closed. And
I've had hair envy of you for a long time, Sean. Yeah, I don't see any questions, so I think we're probably good. Again, if you do have any follow-up questions or comments or anything, feel free to send them to me and Ashley, or to Sean directly via his website, Twitter, or email, and I'm sure he'd be happy to answer them. And just to let everybody know, next week we're having the second webinar of our summer series with Sean Wiltshire from Newfoundland. I'm sure many people know who he is, and if you don't, I would highly recommend checking him out. He's a dynamic speaker and a wonderful disability and inclusion advocate. He is going to be talking about creating an inclusive workforce post-COVID-19. So it's very specific to the world we live in now. So we'll be sending links out for that, and we encourage everybody to attend that as well. So one last look to make sure there's no questions coming up. I don't see any. So I think we're good. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much for your time today, everyone. Really appreciate it. Hope I get a chance to see you in person sometime.